Here. We were all taken by surprise when Chord Electronics came out with the Hugo, designed as a portable digital to analog converter. It was something of a hit and miss device, being of course quite large, quite expensive, and with a large collection of mystery meat buttons. It looked more like something where aliens had landed and dumped on our doorstep. So while it was quite popular, it was quite, I suppose, controversial in that sense. So it was with much pleasant surprise that Chord has come out this year with the Mojo, much smaller, much more portable friendly, and with kind of some of the superfluous features removed from the Hugo. So we have no more Bluetooth, we have no more mystery meat buttons, as most labeled. We just have 3 buttons, in fact, all on the top, which do everything, and they're labeled this time. And we have a usual selection of inputs, coax digital. We have USB input. We have USB charging ports separately to keep power noise out of the circuit and keep the sound quality higher, and a regular optical input, and 2 headphone outputs, which are connected to the same thing. What we haven't lost from the Hugo is that we've got the same technology in here that Rob Watts has been working on for 30 years, and that is a FPGA, or field programmable gate array, which is essentially essentially like a computer with no software on it, except Rob has written software to do some very, very heavy duty mathematical computing for the digital to analog conversion, and then it outputs through a discrete component DAC. So there's basically the only silicon in there is an FPGA plus some other bits of circuitry for the power and what have you, and then it has a very, very minimal analog output, which is powerful enough, as powerful as the Hugo's output, powerful enough to drive very sensitive speakers even, yet it's really compact. I mean, if you want to get an idea how compact it is, it's basically the same size as an Astel & Kern AK100, or maybe a tiny bit larger and a bit thicker. But I just wrap these in a rubber band and use them much like that, or put something in between and wrap them the other way. And it makes for some serious high-end quality digital to analog conversion, but in a portable unit. And this time, instead of the price being outrageously expensive, it's down to about US $600, making it, just unarguably really good value. But all is not so simple, and let me go over some of the features of the unit itself. Power on, we just press this button for 2 seconds and it clicks into life. Now the Hugo, we had this mystery meat volume control that, depending on the volume, would change through the colours of the rainbow. And if you remember your at least elementary school or high school science, and the colours of the rainbow, you get a rough idea of the what colour it relates to, roughly what volume. But this time it's just going from sort of a brown through the reds, through yellows, through green, blue, and up to a kind of white. There are 2 things that happen. First, beyond white, you get an extended range where one volume control, the plus volume control, changes instead, and that's got the extended power range. And then in the other direction, if we go through it slowly, it extends the range in the other direction for sensitive IEMs, though I admit I don't have sensitive enough IEMs to really test how low it can go. I think it only goes to about minus 70 dBs all the same. But now that I've gathered Rob Watts has more IMs on hand, he can test this out more thoroughly. So one stays the same color. The left-hand minus will cycle through its own set of colors before it gets back into the main volume range. So it kind of looks kind of distorted now, the different color balance. We're still going through the lower range, now we're back to normal. But roughly what that means is the same kind of thing. As soon as you get into the sort of greens and blues, that comes out to about line level. If you want to get line level on this, you can switch it off, which I shall do. It takes 2 seconds of clicking. Hold the 2 buttons down and then hit the power button. It will lock onto a line level output, which will not change. Oh, well, it will if you press it and hold it, but it'll select a line level instead of remembering what level you had before, which is one of the things that was really irritating about the Hugo. It wouldn't remember anything, and that's because Rob Watts ran out of space on the FPGA. In this case, he hasn't. So if I set the volume down at this level, press the button for 2 seconds to switch it off, I have to wait 10 seconds, more or less, before it will power on again, 5 to 10 seconds. give it a second longer, and it will remember the volume level I selected before, which you can see here. So in other words, though the number of controls and the setup is a little bit simpler than the Hugo, it's been simplified in a way that it gives you the basic functionality you need and does the job. The only thing that doesn't do well is that the volume control moves slowly, so you can't quickly turn the volume up or down. However, we have, well, it's small, and it's got 4 little rubber feet, so you can put it up against something. Another thing I've been experimenting with for the output is this thing called a clear porter, which is basically, it's not an amp, it's a set of transformers in a box, and it will take balanced input and balanced output. So you can actually, if you have a pair of, say, a pair of Astle and Kern JH Audio IMs, which already has the balanced output already on there, I can plug this in with a mini to mini and it'll give me the balanced output, although it's running through a transformer, so it's not balancing the not doing anything other than a bit of electronic trickery. But it'll strap together nicely. It's got places, obviously these ridges are for some kind of rubber bands, and there are no rubber bands in the box though. But if you use the standard kind of headphone rubber bands, the small rubber bands you get for with portable rigs, they will just sit around there, and you can even sit one in the middle across this ridge, and it will hold together nicely with a portable amp. I mean, I'm using an AK100 now. As soon as I found out that this was the same size, I went and nabbed one before everyone else thought of it, because I wanted a neat little portable rig, although I do give up some screen real estate there. And then, of course, you switch it round there, plug in an optical cable, and you're good to go. Since we're talking about inputs, I've set up my Mojo with the Sys Concepts from Canada optical cable, which they designed specifically for the AK100 Mojo combination. And if you send them a picture with a ruler next to it and a guide showing what you want, they'll do a cable in any kind of angle or shape or whatever. I've even seen someone get one for where the AK100 is flipped over and it's just kind of this kind of distance, like a super short optical cable. Pretty cool stuff, all the same. Anyway, the inputs on the Mojo are a little bit different from the Hugo. With the Hugo, you had the issue where to select the input, you use this button on here. And if I just go in a bit closer, the middle light in there, which is shining, would indicate the input. You'd have, this is supposed to be white. Actually, it's a combo LED with multiple lights glowing in there, which are supposed to combine to be white. And it looks a bit bluey to me. Anyhow, that's high-speed USB, standard USB, green for optical, and of course, if you didn't notice much difference in the colors, yes, it's kind of a little bit hard to see the difference. Red for coax, which was pretty obvious, and blue for Bluetooth. And of course, the irritating thing is you turn the thing off after selecting whatever, and then later on, say the next day, you turn it back on, and of course, it doesn't remember it, it's back to high-speed USB. So if you're using another selection, you'd have to remember to switch it every single time. With the Mojo, on the other hand, it's a little bit different. The Mojo, the USB is split into two parts. There's a charging socket, and then there's a regular input. Now, the regular input, you can't cut the 5-volt line like a lot of people do to stop noise getting in. It uses the 5-volt line to activate the USB circuit. So if that USB circuit isn't activated, it will then default to coax. And if the coax has nothing connected to it at all, which it doesn't detect anything connected, it will then go to optical. For using it portably, you're going to only use one, so it's not a big issue. But if you do hook it up as a desktop, you have to remember that USB is prioritized. So, and then before coax and before optical. So you do have to unplug the standard USB before you use either of the others, otherwise you just won't get any sound. And the other thing about the Mojo is, speaking of the separate charging port, if I switch it on again now, you'll see a little light below the USB port here. This light glows blue when it's got fairly 100% charge, and from about 75% charge, it starts to glow green, and then down to yellow for 50%, red for 25%, and flashing red for below 10%. So you've got a little power indicator light, which is really handy. You had the same thing inside the Hugo in the middle, where the an adjacent light, which showed the same colors depending on the charge, which was handy as well. So it's much the same thing. If you've got a Hugo or you've been looking at one, it's much the same kind of arrangement there. And the $64,000 question is, how does it sound? So in that regard, I've been doing two different kinds of comparisons, and the first is, of course, comparing it to the digital players that I have on hand, and with a variety of IEMs that I have some Talk Audio TO96Z Dynamics. I have the Dita Audios, which I don't have sitting here at the moment, JH Audio Roxannes and Laylas, and Laylas are pretty challenging to drive, and my good old Universal Ultimate Ears reference monitors, which are very good for getting a clear idea of how a component sounds, and as well full-sized headphones. But first I'd like to start with the digital side of things and how the Mojo sounds compared to these DAPs that I have here. I've got the FIO X5 II on hand. I had the AK240 before, I've now sold it. I have a very good benchmark at $999, the Calyx M, which unfortunately right now, I wanted to have all these powered on, but this one looks like the battery's gone flat. The SoundAware M1 ESSA, which is a very interesting little unit, or very basic design, but very good tech inside. And of course my good old iPhone 6, which is, it makes for a good transport for the Mojo, which I'll talk about in just a second. Now, as DACs go, I can hook up these two, the X5 Mark II and the Calyx M, as DACs, so I can plug them into my computer. And that means I can compare them directly to the Mojo. I could actually output both to both things simultaneously in AB switch using my Studio 6 as an amp. And that gave me a fairly good idea of the performance of the Mojo relative to the others. The SoundAware M1 is quite interesting because it also uses an FPGA, but it feeds a regular Texas Instruments or Burr Brown DAC rather than having just a discrete output. And it doesn't have the FPGA, I don't know if it has as much computing power as the one inside the Mojo. And the one inside the Mojo, of course, you output, the whole thing outputs 1.7 watts of power and gets quite warm. I mean, it has some serious computing power in there compared to your average DAC. So with that in mind, hooking them up as DACs, one of the things I tested was the USB sensitivity. And one of the things that bugged me about the Hugo was that, it sounded different depending on what USB, what you plugged it into through the USB port. And it seemed to be very sensitive to noise. In that regard, the Mojo has the advantage of splitting off the power to a separate input. So you can leave it plugged into, as I said before, 1 or 2 amp charger, and it will stay happily powered up. And this shouldn't interfere in general with the sound quality coming through the USB. That being said, I use, just as I do with the Hugo, a shit weird USB, fixing device, for want of a better term, and that seems to produce some excellent results. I haven't tried any of the other kinds of USB reclockers, whatevers, noise reducers or whatever as yet, so that's on my list of things to do. But all the same, I'm pretty happy with the results I've got with the shit weird, and there's obviously the improvements with the USB input compared to the Hugo. Now, in that, the other DAPs are sensitive as well to the USB input, the X5 Mark II, and the Calyx M. Calyx devices, I had an original Calyx 24192 DAC, and that could be transformed with good USB input and USB power. The Calyx M, to some degree, seems to be the same. It sounded better with the shit weird as well, as did the X5 Mark II. But the main difference was, as these use regular digital to analog conversion chips with the filters, the digital filters in there which come with the chips, they tend to be improved. If you have a Mac and you have Audivana Plus, that has what software built in called Isotope. And Isotope has probably, it's supposed to be the industry's best resampling software. I don't know if that's true or not, but if you set it to maximum upsampling or maximum upsampling in multiples of 2, and with a bit of filter, with a bit of tweaking, maxing out the settings and a bit of other tweaking, you can improve the sound of either of these two DAPs significantly. And you'll find that in high-end DACs, such as the Bricasti M1, I don't know if I've pronounced that correctly, that has a similar system to what the SoundAware uses. They use their own, maybe their own FPGA or their own chip, with programmed chip to feed the DAC, and that improves the filter quality. And I believe you can switch between the default Sabre filters on an M1 and compare that to the filters that Bricasti have included. And the results apparently with the built-in filters are better. In the same way, by using the Isotope upsampling, you can improve the effect of the the Calyx M1 and the X5 Mark II, as well as other things like the what was it called again? Orenda Flow. Can't believe I'm forgetting it already. The Orenda Flow was the same. It was a Sabre-based thing, and you can improve over the original filters by using upsampling. And if you use it from an iPhone, you could use the DSD upsampling as well, built into Onkyo HF Player. But the Mojo, of course, needs none of that, as it has the equivalent of 2048 times upsampling. I mean, the computing power in this completely blows away the computing power I was using to feed either of the other devices and the Orenda Flow. I mean, it's just a vastly better. It is even higher res processing than DSD processing and DXD processing. It's completely, it pushes the envelope to the maximum as far as it can be fit into a device like this. Really hardcore computing power. And the result, Rob Watts just posted some measurements showing it with a noise floor of minus 170 dB. I mean, there's only one measuring device in the world pretty much that can measure down that far. And it had the remaining artifacts on the test only showed minus 120, 128, 127, thereabouts was the noisiest artifact on the Mojo, which gives it, if that's any indication, a full maximum physically possible 21 bits of processing capability, of a reproduction capability, which is the best, high-end DAC capable processing. And what that means, so not measurably it's excellent, audibly I found, comparing, even using isotope upsampling to these two, they were still a little bit behind the Mojo in terms of the sound coming through in a natural way, the sound coming through, instruments sounding more real, more less digital, less artificial. The Mojo was probably the nicest sounding. That being said, now I haven't talked about the M1 yet. This, with its FPGA built in and separated ground planes for all the digital and analog components and all the other fancy things, which again needs a whole video, came the closest. And this is the analog version, and the analog version is a little bit warm sounding. They say it's like an old CD player, if you have any experience with the old CD players and their old ladder R2R chips. It's one of the nicest, smoothest, and easiest to listen to players I've ever heard, and is fantastic also. And at least one person said they're happy with this and they wouldn't bother with a Mojo in that case. The only thing, of course, the user interface is pretty basic, but again, another video for that one. So in that regard, this is a little bit warmer sounding. The analog version is a little bit warmer sounding than the Mojo, and the Mojo is more smooth and realistic sounding than the other DAPs I have on hand, and of course, considerable jump above the iPhone 6. Now, Rob Watts claims that the Mojo has 730 milliamps of output power at its most, and that's more than enough to power pretty much most full-sized headphones and even really sensitive speakers. And he's talked about driving even sensitive horns with a Mojo and a Hugo, which is pretty impressive going. I tried the Mojo with the Hi-Fi-Man HE1000s, Sennheiser's HE800s, and Mr. Speaker's Ethers, which are my main full-sized headphones, and I got some interesting results. Starting with Mr. Speaker's Ethers, these are quite sensitive, and I felt pretty happy as I was listening with this out of the Mojo. I mean, for preference, I have my Studio 6 with tubes that are just a slight touch of warmth added to the sound overall, and that's for my preference, because the ethers can sound a bit thin, maybe a little bit thin sounding for some people's preferences, and a touch of warmth is all good. But all the same, no trouble driving these. I mean, these will drive even out of a phone, so there was no trouble there at all. And they did a good job picking up the resolution the Mojo was capable of as far as headphones are. With the Sennheiser HD800s, I have mine slightly modded. I've replaced the black driver covers with some non-slip matting, which I'll go into another video sometime, and recabled, partially for convenience, as I have, different tails that I plug in there, which I can plug into different amps as required, balanced or unbalanced. And I was actually really satisfied with my slightly more bassy tuned HD800s and the Mojo. Some people were not so enamored by that combination, but I didn't find that there was any lack of driving ability with the HD800s at all. I was happy listening to them as I was listening out of the Studio 6. Well, the Studio 6 was still a little bit better, a little bit more dynamic. The same thing I'd found with the Hugo, though the slightly warmer tuning was a better match with the HD800s and Mr. Speaker's Ethers, of course. I think the tuning was about right, but I didn't feel like there was anything inadequate in the headphone drive in that regard. And contrary to popular belief, high impedance headphones are actually easier to drive and not harder. It's mainly that the tuning of the HD800s with that 6 kHz peak makes them very sensitive to any sound of distortion that comes through the treble. It becomes much more accentuated, and I didn't feel like there was anything coming through that was unpleasant with the Mojo at all. Now, with the HE1000s, it was a different story altogether. The HE1000s didn't sound anywhere near as good as they did out of my Studio 6. They sounded a little bit underpowered, a little bit mushy. And although you could give someone a taste of what the HE1000s are like, I mean, I first heard HE1000s out of a FIO X5, which again was completely inadequate, but it gave me an idea of what kind of potential they had. Similar with the Mojo, you could give someone an idea, and you could probably listen a little bit, but you know that they're not going to be quite anywhere near as dynamic or capable as they would be out of a full-sized amp. Now, I tried, out of interest, my favorite portable amp is a head amp Pico Power, as you'll see here once the camera gets in focus. It was made fairly objectively minded, as was the Mojo. It has a similar kind of output stage. It only has 3 transistors, and it has some very well measured and very linear performance. And it's hard to say, you know, I mean, the Mojo with all its capability, whether this combination was really better. It felt a little bit better. The Pico Power has a very slightly gentler sound than the Mojo does. And it's hard to say if this means it's worse or it's better, but it was a slight, tiny bit more relaxed listen, not relaxed as in like warm tuned tonally, but as in it seemed less like it was less like it was making an effort. But it's hard to say that was better or worse again. Still, I enjoyed the combination, and it can again drive full-sized headphones pretty well. It has 2 9-volt batteries. It's kind of like the upmarket Mercedes-Benz style version of an Objective 2 in a sense, except much better made. But anyhow, the other thing I plugged in was a bizarre thing, which I should do a video on by itself, is called a clear porter. This version is the balanced version, the NXT28K. It can take a single-ended or balanced input, and output's single-ended or balanced, and the balanced output, of course, is an AK style 4-pin socket, and it gives you a balanced output, but I mean it's through a transformer, obviously, not by anything else. And it's supposed to give you better focus on headphones, and it does a tiny bit, and it did a tiny bit with the Mojo. Again, whether it was better or worse, I don't know in terms, but I sort of, you know, when I had it sitting at home, I hooked up the whole deal and listened with the HD800s, and I didn't feel any need to plug in the Studio 6, which is very good going for the Mojo. So that's pretty much how it was for me with full-sized headphones. IMs were a similar story, and here I have a pair of JH Audio Layla Universals here. And the dynamic IMs I have are the Dita Audio, the Answer, and the Talk TO96Z, and both were driven in the same way as the full-size headphones, driven really well, and no questions about the driving capability there. The main thing, the Laylas have, which are well overdue for a review, they've tripped me up on a lot of gear, which is hence why the delay. And they can change tone to some degree, mainly in the treble, depending on what they're plugged into. And I think it's the fourth order crossover in there, which is unique to these IMs, which is what's causing all the problems with this system. And I was just plugging in again to have a listen to confirm. I was listening to an acoustic track where there's some hiss, and plugging in the clear porter into the system, you know, knocked out the hiss, which was really good, which I think roughly what this thing is intended to do. But all the same, I really enjoyed the performance out of the Mojo, as I did with the Hugo. And the Hugo was really good with these. And I was comparing it at the time to an ALO Audio RX, the new model, and I couldn't detect a difference. And so the performance was generally really excellent. And the ALO RX is probably my preferred amp with these slightly dark sounding IEMs. But where the Mojo and of course the Hugo benefit with these IEMs is because of the clarity from the crossover. Listening to acoustic tracks and hearing them sound so natural was really lovely, including with full-sized headphones, where it was, instead of having having to have right in your ears any kind of sharp digital sound, they had a really natural, smooth flow of the music, and made them really enjoyable to listen with. The only problem I think maybe with the Mojo is that I'm not sure that the minus 80 dBs of volume is sufficiently low for some super sensitive IEMs. I gather some Westones, and I think there's an Ultrasone, which are ridiculously sensitive and will pick up hiss out of just about anything. I'm not sure that the Hugo will go down, the Mojo will go down low enough for them, but I've heard mixed reports. Some people were fine, some people weren't. I would check if you do have a super sensitive pair of IEMs you really love, like a pair of Westtones. Do give them the Mojo an audition before buying one. Might be a good idea. And otherwise, you might have to get a special amp for them, like the ALO RX or one of these things, which to knock out the hiss. But otherwise, I was really happy with the Mojo and the Laylas and all the other IEMs, the Ultimedia's reference monitors as well. When listening, no problems there. When John Franks told me that the Chord were coming out with a smaller and simpler version of the Hugo, I was very pleased to hear that, and I expected that they would be selling it for maybe around half the price of the Hugo, say around $1,200. So when this came out when it came out with the Mojo, and I found that they had addressed every single criticism of the Hugo, from its large size, unnecessary Bluetooth, that it wouldn't remember the previous set volume, that the issues with a slight noise on the USB causing distortion in the music. I can't. The list was quite long, and to have it at not half the price, but pretty much a quarter of the price, $600. That completely blew me away. And in testing, I've been very impressed with the performance, and it made the Hugo redundant for me. Actually, my Hugo's now sitting in my TV rig, which previously had other components in there, and it's just a really fantastic result. But the thing about the Mojo is I get PMs here and there going, should I get a Mojo? Is it going to work for me? And one of the funny ones was from Hawaii Bad Boy, whom, if you know him, he's has a thing called the Basshead Club. And so you think Basshead and you think, well, people expect to buy a component and imagine it's going to do amazing dynamic things to the music and give you a 3D soundstage where there was no 3D soundstage in the music, obviously, and do crazy stuff and blow them away on first listen. I think if you're after that kind of thing, it's not going to do that. What you get is more detail, more refinement, more realism in the music that you don't get with regular digital components. And in that, the Mojo is definitely going to be good if you're interested in that kind of thing. But it's not going to do anything crazy amazing to the music. It's not going to give you more bass in your headphones. It's not going to do anything quite like that. And I was pleased to find out that Hawaii Bad Boy actually has very strong interest in the qualities that the Mojo has with acoustic music. So that was very pleasing. But I'm always cautious about recommending these things. The thing about the Mojo now is it's just pleasing to see that a manufacturer that we considered a high-end manufacturer is willing to come out with a cheaper component. And lately there have been manufacturers, like Shit Audio and others, have been coming out with stuff that high-performing but cheaper. And that's a really good change, especially in face of criticism of everything, especially in the portable world getting more and more expensive. And I mean, they've always been expensive portable rigs and expensive portable gear, but to have manufacturers actually bring that down and bring basically the high end down to something closer to sane, or much closer to sane, is really good news for everyone. And it's hard for me not to go around Headphone now, and anytime anyone asks for any kind of headphone amping component for around the Mojo's price, I'll just say get a Mojo. Of course, it's not for everyone. Some people might want something more desktop suited. Because it is pretty small and it's mainly aimed at portable. But still, I said it before. I've already written it. I don't do components of the year, but if I was to do a component of the year for 2015, it would be the Chord Mojo. I'm just really, really pleased with how this one has come out. It really blew me away. And it's blown a lot of people away. And so, like Hawaii Bad Boy said, and I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, he thought it was just hype and a load of rubbish. I don't think it is. It's really outstanding effort. And I hope to see more of these kinds of things that in 2016. And this video has been very long, and if you made it all the way through, thanks for taking time to watch for it. And do let me know if there's anything I missed or should have covered or you'd like to see in future videos, and I'll do my best to accommodate that. Feedback is always most welcome. And thank you once again for watching. Please do click on the subscribe link if you'd like to see more.